the Russians crossed over into the Kharkiv region. Of course, there's the fighting in eastern Kharkiv right now, and the fighting near Kupiansk is quite roaring. There was a Ukrainian counteroffensive that had that made some distance. I don't know if I should use the word progress. Now, the fighting in Kupiansk probably is getting the most attention right now in the Kharkiv region. The Russians it's one of the bigger locations that were recaptured during the Ukrainian 2022 counteroffensive. It came with a lot of success. I've interviewed some of the people about retaking Kupiansk. The Ukrainians are very proud of that victory, proud of that liberation. And so having to give up the city is going to be very painful. But if you see the Russian advance from north after they cross the Oskil River, they are making marked progress into the city streets of Kupiansk. Now, the Ukrainians have positions over the river, and the Russians are targeting the flotillas and the rafts that supply the Ukrainians on the other side. But the Russians are held back at a position where the Ukrainians don't have to imminently retreat from Kupiansk because their flanks are not enveloped. And so that does mean that the Russians are taking significant casualties, but because of how Ukrainian lines are stretched across the country by flooding the north of the city after crossing the Oskil River, they've been able to make progress into the city. And the counteroffensive was not successful in encircling them or being able to push the Russians out of the city. And so this is the area that's getting the most attention right now. We don't know for sure how this battle is going to end up, but right now the situation is worsening for the Ukrainian defenders, even though it is at high casualties for the Russians. And I also worry about Ukrainian positions across the river, because if the Russians are successful in consolidating their hold on Kupiansk, or at least the parts of it that they control now, and expand it later, and the Ukrainians don't withdraw their positions across the Oskil River, I do worry about the Russians essentially focusing on all the routes out like a turkey shoot, and then we lose all the infantry or UAV pilots that are across the Oskil River. Not all of them, but a more substantial portion than if there was to be a more organized withdrawal at an earlier point. But right now, that fight is to be determined, and that's not what we're talking about right now. What I'm talking about is another thing in relation to Kharkiv, and that is the blowing up of the reservoir. So the Russians have crossed the border in Kharkiv in two places. They crossed it on the Vovchansk axis and on the Lipsy axis. The Vovchansk axis is on the right here, and the Lipsy axis is on the left. I have not been on the Vovchansk axis. Actually, I I can't remember. That's kind of wild to say out loud, but I actually cannot remember. I think I might have been with air defense teams, and that press officer was pretty cool, and he brought me. Actually, it was a guy who gave me over to somebody else who wasn't a press officer, and he brought me to a point that I believe was 500 meters away from Russian positions. That might have been on the Volchok's axis, but I actually cannot remember. I think it might have been Lipsy. But I was on the Lipsy axis for sure on many other occasions. But regardless of whether or not I was or was not ever on the Vovchansk axis, to be determined, the Russians have largely been quiet on this axis because they crossed the border, got stopped, and then was not able to find a lot more success after that. They were not able to keep on pushing. They were taking significant casualties, and so the Russians had been largely stopped. And in fact, on the Lipsy axis, they had lost some ground, and they had taken substantial casualties. But since then, the positions have consolidated, and the Ukrainians and Russians have essentially been taking pot shots at each other, bombing each other, and throwing drones at each other. The situation has changed slightly, though, in recent days. If you were to zoom in onto Vovchansk, even though it is not the area that is getting the most attention in the news, you can see that there was a recent gain in the city. I was talking to my friend about it. This actually flew over his head, and it flew out over the head of a lot of the people who track the maps. Didn't fly over mine because, eagle-eyed, and by eagle-eyed, I mean I stumbled upon it. I stumbled upon the information. And you can see that this is the area that they captured, that they're making more area. They're expanding not only their area of control, but they're expanding the gray zone into the south as well, into the southern suburbs, as the Russians are intercepting Ukrainian drones, as their drones are fighting back and forth, FPVs and such, mortar positions are fighting back and forth. But it's still largely at the same place, but they have made some progress. And some progress for the Ukrainians is still a problem, because the more Russia grinds forward, the closer they get to actually pushing down into the suburbs and ejecting the Ukrainians from Vovchansk altogether, and claiming another city, claiming another victory, and making their hold over the city more concrete, and getting another a foothold in the Kharkiv region, where the Ukrainians are much more interested in either holding them where they are or eventually finding a way to eject them from the region, since they do not want to freeze the conflict with the Russians in the Kharkiv region, especially considering their previous attempts to capture the city of Kharkiv. So the Ukrainians want to stop this. What do they do? What would you do? Answer at home. Armchair generals everywhere, please submit your ideas. I'll tell the generals right away. Well, what they decided to do, and I don't know how long they've been planning this, I don't know how long they've been considering this, is they blew up a dam. They blew up a water reservoir in the Belgorod region. We actually do have some footage of this. I want to see if we can bring this footage up, if my touchpad would work. This is a great production we have here, folks. Jesus Christ. I think my button actually got jammed. Isn't that unfortunate? Wow. That's a really beautiful picture of a dam. The silliest reason to end a stream. There we go. My goodness. We do have footage of the dam actually flooding. Here it is right here. Now, you can see that that's a lot of water. And a lot of water has to go somewhere. When the Novokakhovka Dam exploded in southern Ukraine, near near the city of Kherson, the floodwater rushed into communities downstream, sweeping away many elderly and disabled people who did not have the ability to get out in time, and there wasn't people to evacuate them in time. Many houses were swept away. Many people's belongings were swept away. It was a disaster. But it also did create logistical problems for people on both sides of the river. There were also other instances of dams and water reservoirs being opened for tactical reasons in this war and in many wars previously. This is an age-old tactic. And so the bet that was being made on the Ukrainian side was, hey, winter is right around the corner. And if you're in a Russian trench, being wet and cold is going to be terrible. Not only is it going to be terrible if you're wet and cold, it will also be terrible if you're trying to get ammunition and the trucks that deliver them are not able to deliver them because the roads to your position are flooded. Now, you can still do drone deliveries from a distance, as we can see, night bombers. I wrote an article for it about this on offbeatresearch.com. You guys can go read it if you want to. You know, drones can pick up some of the logistical slack, but if you're trying to transport an 122 millimeter shell, you do not want a night bomber drone to be the one dropping it. If a night bomber drone is dropping a 120 millimeter bomb on you, it's probably Ukrainian, and you're going to have a bad time. So these two things were probably the targets of this. Now, is it a success? Right now, it seems to be a success. It seems to be a marquee success. The flooding in the Belgorod region is quite bad. I don't know if you guys have seen the images that are coming out of the Belgorod region, but it seems to be that there are videos of soldiers posting their trenches flooded and their trenches being flooded. Uh, they're, complaining about not being able to get dry and stuff like that. And right now, it is October. It is late October, soon to be December, November, December. We're going to the winter months. And so wet in a trench, that sucks. Wet for your logistics, that sucks. Being wet all around just sucks. Here's a video from the Russian perspective.
Ой, в каком плачевном состоянии переправа.
Motorcycle becomes kind of pointless if you have to drag it across wood that you placed down to get through the mud, doesn't it?
Закатили. Ноги все насквозь мокрые. Давайте.
Here is a video also of one of the videos of what a Russian dam in the Belgorod region right now looks like, and what this could mean for the positions in Volchansk, for the positions across the border, is not only logistical strain, but if the water floods down deep enough, I mean, it's going to be a problem for them walking around trying to get to those positions. See, trying to get to the front line in this war is extremely dangerous. It's probably the most dangerous part of the job, is getting to the front. When I was driving into Pokrovsk and out of Pokrovsk, another shout out for the documentary releasing this Saturday, the Pokrovsk documentary, Be There or Be Square. When I was going in and out, that was the most dangerous period. We had to take cover due to drones being overhead, and that is the period of danger because that is the period where you are exposing yourself. And this is the most transparent war in human history. There are more digital cameras on flying machines going all across the front, trying to give commanders a real live image of what the front line looks like, of what's going on at any one time. And with so many drones constantly flying around with quicker and quicker reaction times due to the quantity in the sky and the quantity of drone teams and, how quick they're getting and throwing them out there, that threat getting to and from the position, when you expose yourself, that's the position of danger. And so there's a few ways that soldiers have adapted to deal with this. One is driving fast as fuck, right? Makes sense. Now, if you can't drive through the mud, that's a problem. That can be complicated through this. Another thing that's a problem is that if you're driving a vehicle, you can be a lot easier to spot. You're a bigger target. You could be easier to hit because you're a large target. Whereas if you're a person, you're a smaller target. You can be wearing pretty decent enough green camo. Maybe you can, depending upon the geography, maybe you can travel along tree lines or different types of cover. And so in many areas of the front line, when I'm getting offered embeds, it's like, Dylan, we in this route we drive in. This route we'd have to do 13 miles of walking, another 4 miles of this and that. When they were talking to me about going down that lake to the south of Konstantinivka, they're talking about putting me in a boat and stuff. So, there are soldiers and a lot of teams that do rotations on foot that will make the trek 15 miles on foot in order to rotate. In fact, if you look at the Pokrovsk front line right now, a lot of that rotation is being done on foot in order to try to save lives, and because to be quite frank, the soldiers feel more comfortable about it. Here is the 25th Airborne in Pokrovsk, on foot, going in and out of positions to give you an idea of the type of danger that they're putting themselves in.
Твою мать!
По нам попали.
So many of those just drones scattered across the front now, man. Just busted up drones. Piece of plastic, burn out battery. Anyway, now that's dangerous enough as it is. So many soldiers die trying to go 13, 15, 10, 7, how many number of kilometers that they have to go to get to and from their position or to and from whatever their objective is. No? Very, very difficult job. And I gotta say, the worst time I had, or the worst time my buddies had, probably in Kherson when we were bombed after the Novokakhovka Dam exploded. The mud on the shoreline was so bad that when they got bombed, when everything went down and John Jones got hit in the stomach with shrapnel, and you know, they were trying to figure out a way to drag him out. They had to run through mud that went up to their knees, and it was like they had to pull their legs out of the mud every single time to put it back down. So awful when you're getting bombed and you've got this like instinct to get away. And that was just for like a short period, a short like sprint that was a shoreline from the river to the bunkers. And so if you expand that to the Belgorod region for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers, not only the trenches themselves, but the distance between the trenches, the distance between positions for the Russians, not only flooding it with water so the trucks cannot move, but making, once, you know, the water subsides a little bit, the mud will still be bad in the areas. And right now it's absolutely atrocious. And that means people trying to travel 10 to 15 kilometers, not just on foot, but on foot through water and mud. And if you're stuck in the mud and then there's an FPV, oh my God, man. That sounds like hell on earth. I kid you not, I could not design a more hellish version of the battlefield in this war than that conception of it. Because for me, this is, I mean, of course, it was definitely the artillery war early on. And there's still, of course, artillery. It was just with Bogdana on the border between Donetsk and Dnipro. We're going to see that Bogdana artillery working in the documentary again this Saturday, November 1st. But right now, drones are dominant. Drones are everywhere. Drones are swarming. Drones are transcendent. I mean, like, so the idea of having to dodge and duck and get into cover the way I had to in Pokrovsk, the way we had to in Konstantinivka or in that direction or in the tree lines, the way that's necessary to survive, and having to do that while your feet are in mud that makes you feel like you're running underwater. So that ducking and getting down to it takes longer. Going from tree line to tree line is slower. The possibility of just getting stuck in place is real. And you're not just doing this, you know, wearing whatever you're wearing it. You're wearing body armor, you're wearing a helmet. You've got a rifle on your shoulder. you got grenades, you got medical kit. Of course, you got mud-caked boots. And you got to do all of what you need to do to survive from grenade dropping drones, from FPV drones, from Baba Yaga, the witch drones, the night bombers that I filmed like 4 times with the night bombers. Those things can drop bombs as big as 120 millimeters. I've seen bombs the size of a small beagle strapped to those things and dropped on Russian positions. And so any of that, while having to deal with the mud, is absolutely atrocious. And they will take out those night bombers if you're doing an assault. And that's another thing. I'm just talking about getting to a position. Imagine if the Russians are given instructions to engage in assaults through this type of stuff. Now, look, I think that they're going to have problems enough maintaining the positions and dealing with it. I think they're not going to engage in any large scale assaults or anything that would require a lot of logistical load at this moment. But my point is that floodwaters and muddy soil is hellish in these wide open fields between tree lines that you have to navigate through in order to get to where you need to go. And so there's nowhere I'd rather not be. I would rather be anywhere else than in the Belgorod region in a trench right now, or given rotation orders.